The Big Book of Bad Stereotypes. Throughout history, media has played an influential role in shaping and reinforcing perceptions of different ethnic groups. While today's media landscape is more diverse, its roots are tangled in harmful portrayals, with early forms of entertainment laying the groundwork for stereotypes that persist even now. The roots of many racial stereotypes can be traced back to minstrel shows of the 19th century. These performances featured white actors in blackface, exaggerating physical features and behaviors to caricature Black Americans. Minstrel shows weren't just about humor, they were propaganda pieces that reinforced the idea that Black people were inferior, less intelligent, and fit for servitude. Characters like Jim Crow and Zip Coon became staples in minstrel shows, depicting Black people as either happy-go-lucky slaves who were better off under white supervision or as buffoons incapable of handling freedom. These shows reflected and reinforced the racist ideologies of the time, giving them cultural legitimacy that echoed well into the 20th century. One of the most significant early examples of a negative stereotype in Hollywood was the portrayal of Black American men as lazy, unintelligent, and comically inept. This image was embodied in the character of Stepin Fetchit, played by actor Lincoln Perry. Born in 1902, Perry was the first Black actor to gain fame in Hollywood, but his success came at a cost. Stepin Fetchit's mannerisms, exaggerated, slow, and subservient, became the blueprint for how Black men were portrayed in early cinema. He appeared in dozens of films during the 1920s and 1930s, including The Ghost Talks and Judge Priest. These films often depicted his character as both a figure of comic relief and incompetence, making audiences laugh at his expense while embedding the idea that Black men were inferior, childlike, and foolish. Perry defended his work, claiming that it was subversive in its own way. After all, his characters often got what they wanted through cunning disguised as stupidity. However, to audiences, these portrayals served as confirmation of racist assumptions about Black people's intellectual inferiority. While Perry's portrayal made him wealthy, the legacy of Stepin Fetchit left lasting harm, reinforcing stereotypes that have taken decades to begin dismantling. Stepp and others were also guilty of the negative stereotype of the scared Black man has roots in historical depictions that sought to demean and disempower Black men, portraying them as cowardly and fearful. This image was often used to perpetuate the notion that Black men lacked the courage or strength to stand up for themselves or their communities, reinforcing harmful narratives about racial inferiority. In literature, film, and other media, Black men were frequently shown as easily frightened, afraid of authority, or overly anxious, which contributed to a larger societal perception of weakness. These portrayals were particularly damaging because they contrasted sharply with the reality of Black men's experiences, where courage was often necessary for survival in a society structured by racism and oppression. Such stereotypes have also been used to justify the systemic mistreatment of Black men. The idea of the scared Black man served to diminish their humanity, suggesting they were incapable of leadership or resistance. This image stands in stark opposition to the strength and resilience that many Black men have historically demonstrated in the face of adversity, making it a harmful and dehumanizing trope that has had lasting consequences in how Black men are perceived in American society and beyond. The impact of stereotypes wasn't confined to the stage or the big screen. Radio became the next battleground for negative portrayals of Black Americans, most notably through the popular program Amos and Andy. Debuting in 1928, the radio show was created by two white men, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll, who voiced the Black characters Amos and Andy. The show depicted the lives of two Black men from the South trying to make it in the North, yet it played into many of the same harmful stereotypes popularized by minstrelsy. The characters were bumbling and incompetent, constantly making bad decisions and getting into trouble. The popularity of Amos and Andy only reinforced these images in the minds of listeners, many of whom had limited interaction with Black people outside of media portrayals. The show transitioned to television in 1951, further expanding its influence. By that time, there was growing criticism from Black American communities about the harmful stereotypes it perpetuated. Civil rights groups, including the NAACP, called for the show's cancellation, citing its damaging impact on how Black Americans were viewed and treated. The show was eventually taken off the air in 1953, but the damage was already done. The early history of film and television isn't complete without examining cartoons, where racial caricatures were not only common but celebrated. Cartoons like Mickey's Melodrama 1933, produced by Disney, featured characters in blackface and exaggerated black stereotypes for comedic effect. The cartoon was a direct nod to minstrel shows, even featuring Mickey Mouse performing in blackface. Other animated shorts featured similar depictions, portraying black characters as either lazy, aggressive, or unintelligent. These images were aimed at children, embedding these stereotypes into young minds. Cartoons like Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips and Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs also targeted other ethnic groups, showing how widespread and normalized racial stereotypes were in early media. These early portrayals weren't just casual entertainment, they had a profound effect on how different ethnic groups were viewed in society. People who had little to no contact with Black Americans, for example, would see these films, radio shows, and cartoons and believe that all black people were like Stepin Fetchit or Amos and Andy. The repetitive nature of these stereotypes made them seem like objective truths rather than harmful fabrications. However, these early stereotypes also sparked resistance. Black American filmmakers, writers, and activists began pushing back against these portrayals. Oscar Micheaux, a pioneering Black American director, created films that offered counter-narratives to the dominant images of black inferiority. His films highlighted the complexities and humanity of black life, challenging Hollywood's one-dimensional portrayals. By the mid-20th century, civil rights movements and social activism started to gain momentum, challenging the deeply entrenched stereotypes in American media. Black American actors, directors, and writers began to carve out spaces where they could tell authentic stories that reflected their realities. The rise of Sidney Poitier in Hollywood marked a pivotal moment. Poitier broke away from the Stepin Fetchit mold by playing intelligent, dignified characters who navigated the complexities of race relations in America. His roles in films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, In the Heat of the Night, and The Defiant Ones provided audiences with more nuanced portrayals of black men, characters who were not defined by subservience or foolishness but by their strength and intelligence. Poitier's characters were not only intelligent but often found themselves in conflict with racist white characters, exposing the ignorance of those who underestimated them. His success in Hollywood was a breakthrough for black actors and a challenge to the industry's tendency to typecast black men as foolish or unintelligent. In addition, the creation of blaxploitation films in the 1970s represented another form of resistance against dominant stereotypes. While these films were often criticized for perpetuating violence and crime in the black community, they also empowered black audiences by portraying black protagonists as powerful, rebellious, and self-sufficient. Films like Shaft and Superfly gave rise to new icons of black strength and independence, although they still existed in a complex relationship with the historical legacy of harmful stereotypes. Though blatant stereotypes have become less common in today's media, their remnants can still be seen. Hollywood and television have made strides in including more diverse stories and characters, but the shadow of past representations lingers. The stereotype of the black criminal, for instance, is still pervasive in films, TV shows, and news media. Black men, in particular, are often typecast as gang members, drug dealers, or violent criminals, a narrative that contributes to the real-world criminalization of black bodies. Similarly, other ethnic groups are often portrayed through a limited lens. Latinx characters are frequently depicted as laborers or immigrants, Asian characters are often seen as math geniuses or martial artists, and Middle Eastern characters are portrayed as terrorists. These images are rooted in the same simplistic thinking that fueled early Hollywood stereotypes. Beyond film and television, commercials have also played a significant role in perpetuating stereotypes. Advertisements, designed to be short and memorable, often lean on easily recognizable tropes to convey their message quickly. Over the years, many commercials have unintentionally reinforced stereotypes by portraying black men as less intelligent or competent than their white counterparts. For example, commercials that feature black men in slapstick scenarios, where they are the butt of the joke, subtly uphold the notion that black men are inherently foolish or comically inept. Even when not overtly offensive, these portrayals contribute to the broader cultural narrative that black men lack sophistication or intelligence, reinforcing harmful biases. While there has been significant progress in the representation of black men in film and television, stereotypes have not fully disappeared. However, new voices in media are actively working to challenge and subvert these harmful tropes. Spike Lee and the new wave of black filmmakers. In the late 1980s and 1990s, directors like Spike Lee took up the mantle, using film as a medium to critique the media's portrayal of black people. Lee's films, such as Do the Right Thing (1989) and Malcolm X (1992), portrayed black men and women as complex, fully realized individuals. Lee's work not only challenged stereotypes but also questioned broader issues of racism and representation in media. In more recent years, films like Get Out (2017), directed by Jordan Peele, have used horror and satire to address the subtle and overt ways in which black men are still seen as other in American society. Peele's film explores the fears and anxieties of black men in predominantly white spaces, turning the tables on traditional stereotypes and forcing audiences to confront their own biases. Shows like Atlanta, created by Donald Glover, offer a fresh take on the lives of black men, portraying them as nuanced and multidimensional. The characters in Atlanta navigate humor, tragedy, and everything in between, without falling into the trap of outdated tropes. The show's success is a testament to the power of representation when it is done thoughtfully and authentically. As we move forward, content creators, filmmakers, and writers play a crucial role in challenging and rewriting these harmful narratives. The rise of streaming platforms and independent filmmaking has provided marginalized voices with a platform to share stories that break away from these harmful tropes. Shows like Insecure and Blackish offer nuanced portrayals of Black American life, while films like Parasite and Roma showcase the intricacies of non-white, non-Western experiences. It's essential for creators to reflect on their own biases and consider the impact of the stories they tell. Tokenism, or the inclusion of one or two diverse characters to fill a quota, is not enough. Representation needs to be meaningful, with characters who have depth, agency, and autonomy in the narrative. The origins of stereotypes in media are deeply rooted in a racist history that prioritized white supremacy and used entertainment to uphold social hierarchies. The images that emerged from early film, radio, and advertising were not harmless jokes but tools of oppression, meant to demean and control how ethnic groups, particularly Black Americans, were perceived. While we've made progress in combating these stereotypes, their echoes still linger in modern media. Understanding where these images come from and how they shaped societal attitudes is the first step in dismantling them. Every individual is unique, and media must evolve to reflect the complexity of people's lived experiences rather than reducing them to harmful caricatures. The future of media can, and should, reflect the rich diversity of human experience, moving away from outdated portrayals that reinforce negative perceptions and towards stories that uplift, challenge, and inspire. Media has the power to shape minds and influence societal attitudes, but with that power comes responsibility. By learning from the past and actively working to correct its mistakes, we can create a media landscape where all people are seen and valued for who they truly are, not just the stereotypes that have been placed upon them. The violent black man stereotype. Now we take a deep dive into the origins and perpetuation of the violent black man stereotype in media. This is a damaging and enduring trope, often linked to the criminalization of black communities, and it continues to inform how black men are perceived in both fiction and reality. The roots of this stereotype stretch back more than a century, but it still casts a long shadow today. One of the earliest and most infamous examples of media shaping public perception is The Birth of a Nation, directed by D.W. Griffith. This film was not just a technical marvel for its time, but it was also a potent tool for perpetuating the image of black men as violent and predatory, especially towards white women. Black men in the film were depicted as savage criminals, an image that reinforced racist ideologies and was used to justify discriminatory laws and practices like segregation and lynching. The film glorified the Ku Klux Klan, positioning them as protectors of white society from violent black men. The long-term impact of this portrayal cannot be overstated. The Birth of a Nation was not just entertainment, it was propaganda that helped shape how black men were viewed by millions of Americans. Even today, echoes of this trope persist in news media and fictional storytelling. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and the violent black man stereotype had shifted somewhat but remained pervasive. In films like Boys and the Hood 1991 and Menace to Society 1993, we see a focus on inner-city violence, gangs, and crime. These films, while praised for their realism and social commentary, also fed into the idea that black men are inherently violent or drawn to criminal lifestyles. Boys and the Hood, directed by John Singleton, is a classic example. The film offers a nuanced exploration of systemic racism, poverty, and violence in South Central Los Angeles. However, to many outside the black community, it became another piece of evidence supporting the stereotype that black neighborhoods are dangerous and that black men, in particular, are violent. Similarly, Menace to Society follows the story of a young man named Kane who, despite his intelligence and potential, falls deeper into a cycle of violence and crime. The film portrays the brutal realities of life in inner-city Los Angeles, but like Boys and the Hood, it is often reduced by viewers to a confirmation of pre-existing stereotypes. In Training Day, Denzel Washington plays Detective Alonzo Harris, a corrupt and violent cop who embodies many of the stereotypes that have dogged black men for generations. Washington's performance earned him an Academy Award, but it also raised questions about the roles that black actors are asked to play and the impact those roles have on public perception. Harris is portrayed as a ruthless character, someone who operates outside the law and uses violence to achieve his goals. This is a complex role, and Washington's talent brought depth to the character, but at its core, it still plays into the notion of the violent black man, a trope that audiences, consciously or unconsciously, absorb. While Training Day is a work of fiction, it reinforces real-world biases, particularly when it comes to law enforcement's treatment of black men. The belief that black men are more violent or more likely to commit crimes has been used to justify excessive policing, racial profiling, and harsher sentencing in courts. Media portrayals like Harris in Training Day feed into those narratives, whether intended or not. This stereotype didn't just live in live-action films, it was rampant in animated media as well. Cartoons from earlier eras often depicted black characters as aggressive or animalistic, using exaggerated, dehumanizing features. In some cases, black men were literally portrayed as animals, reinforcing the idea that they were somehow less than human. These portrayals were often seen in cartoons like Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat 1941 and Jungle Jitters 1938, which portrayed black men as brutish, lazy, or violently impulsive. Such representations have lingering effects even today, as these images continue to shape how audiences think about black men in real life. It's important to recognize that while media portrayals of violent black men have been widespread, they are not reflective of reality. Research has shown that black men are no more likely to be violent or commit crimes than any other ethnic group. In fact, the factors that contribute to crime, such as poverty, lack of education, and systemic inequality, are often ignored in favor of simplistic, racialized narratives. When media focuses disproportionately on black men as violent criminals, it dehumanizes an entire group of people and ignores the systemic issues at play. This has real-world consequences, not only in how black men are treated by law enforcement but also in how they are perceived by society at large. Thankfully, there has been progress in pushing back against these harmful stereotypes. Filmmakers like Spike Lee, Jordan Peele, and Ava DuVernay are telling more nuanced, humanizing stories about black men. Get Out 2017, directed by Jordan Peele, is a horror film that addresses racial tensions in a thought-provoking way, turning the stereotypical narrative on its head. In addition, television shows like Atlanta and The Wire have portrayed black men with greater complexity, showing them as fully realized characters with flaws, strengths, and humanity. These representations are important steps toward undoing the damage caused by a century of harmful media portrayals. The stereotype of the violent black man is deeply ingrained in American media and culture, but it is not immutable. As more creators from diverse backgrounds gain control over their own stories, we are seeing a slow but steady dismantling of this harmful trope. However, it's crucial that audiences remain critical of the media they consume and understand that these portrayals, while common, do not represent the full reality of black men or the communities in which they live. Change is happening, but it requires ongoing effort, not just from black filmmakers and actors, but from all of us as viewers. We must demand better, more nuanced representations that reflect the diversity and complexity of black men's lives. This episode has shown how deeply embedded the violent black man stereotype is, but with awareness and action, we can ensure that future generations are not shaped by the same damaging narratives. The magical Negro stereotype, one of the most pervasive and troubling tropes that has been present in Hollywood and popular media for decades. This stereotype depicts black characters as wise, mystical figures who exist primarily to aid white protagonists, often sacrificing their own well-being to ensure the success or enlightenment of the white characters. While these characters are typically portrayed in a positive light, the underlying message reinforces racial hierarchies and limits the roles of black characters to supportive or secondary functions. The term, magical Negro, was popularized by film critic Spike Lee, who criticized the pattern in mainstream films where black characters served as spiritual guides for white protagonists without any real agency of their own. The roots of this stereotype can be traced back to literature and film from the early 20th century, where black characters were often portrayed as mystical or primitive, embodying some form of ancient wisdom or a deep connection to spiritual realms. In many cases, these characters are portrayed as almost superhuman in their ability to solve the white protagonist's problems. However, they remain fundamentally disconnected from their own desires, goals, and complex inner lives. Their primary purpose is to serve, guide, or assist white characters in ways that subtly uphold racial power dynamics. One of the most famous examples of the magical Negro is John Coffey, played by Michael Clarke Duncan in The Green Mile, 1999. Coffey is a death row inmate with supernatural healing powers, and throughout the film, he uses his abilities to help the white prison guards and even cure a white woman of her illness. His character is portrayed as gentle, kind, and wise, yet he ultimately sacrifices himself to ensure the well-being of the white characters. The film, while critically acclaimed, reinforces the idea that black characters exist to save white people at the expense of their own lives. Another example can be seen in The Legend of Bagger Vance 2000, where Will Smith plays the title character, a mystical caddy who helps a struggling white golfer, played by Matt Damon, find his way in life and in the sport. Bagger Vance is portrayed as calm, all-knowing, and almost otherworldly, with his entire existence revolving around guiding the white protagonist toward success. Similarly, in Bruce Almighty 2003, Morgan Freeman plays God, a literal embodiment of the magical Negro trope. Freeman's character grants Jim Carrey's character divine powers, allowing him to learn valuable life lessons. Once again, the black character exists solely to support the white protagonist's journey, with no exploration of his own story or motivations. The magical Negro stereotype functions as a subtle reinforcement of racial hierarchies. By positioning black characters as wise but subservient figures, it suggests that they are naturally inclined to help white characters achieve their goals. These characters are often othered, seen as possessing supernatural abilities or wisdom that separates them from ordinary humanity. However, despite their mystical knowledge, they remain powerless to affect their own lives or destinies. Their primary function is to assist white protagonists in their personal growth or redemption, often at great personal cost. This stereotype also denies black characters their own narratives. They are rarely given the same complexity, flaws, or personal goals as their white counterparts. Instead, they are portrayed as perfect, benevolent figures who exist solely to serve others. In doing so, the magical Negro trope reinforces the idea that black people should be content in subordinate roles, serving as tools for white advancement rather than pursuing their own ambitions or desires. While the magical Negro stereotype may appear positive on the surface, after all, these characters are often depicted as kind, wise, and benevolent. The deeper implications are problematic. By relegating black characters to these roles, media reinforces the idea that black people should be valued only for their ability to serve and support white individuals. This not only limits the roles available to black actors but also sends a message to audiences about the place of black people in society. Moreover, the stereotype perpetuates the idea that black suffering and sacrifice are acceptable, as long as they contribute to the success or enlightenment of white characters. The magical Negro is often depicted as enduring great hardship or even death, but these sacrifices are seen as noble because they benefit the white protagonist. This reinforces the dehumanization of black people, suggesting that their lives and well-being are secondary to the development of white characters. While the magical Negro stereotype persists, there have been efforts to subvert or challenge it in recent years. One notable example is Jordan Peele's Get Out 2017, which turns the trope on its head. The film's protagonist, Chris, is a black man navigating a terrifying and oppressive white world. Rather than serving as a guide for a white character, Chris is the one who must save himself, and the film critiques the ways in which black people are often objectified and exploited by white society. Other filmmakers, such as Ava DuVernay and Barry Jenkins, have also sought to tell more complex, humanizing stories about black characters. In Jenkins' Moonlight 2016, for example, black characters are portrayed with depth, nuance, and agency, free from the reductive tropes that have long dominated Hollywood. These films present black characters as fully realized individuals with their own struggles, desires, and goals, moving away from the harmful stereotypes of the past. The magical Negro stereotype is a damaging trope that reinforces racial hierarchies by positioning black characters as mystical, self-sacrificing figures whose sole purpose is to serve white protagonists. While these characters are often portrayed positively, the underlying message is one of subservience and dehumanization. By limiting black characters to these roles, media perpetuates harmful ideas about race and power. However, recent films have begun to challenge and subvert this trope, offering more complex and humanizing portrayals of black characters. As audiences, it is important to recognize these stereotypes and demand better, more nuanced representation of black individuals in media. By doing so, we can move toward a future where all characters are allowed to be fully realized, multidimensional human beings. Now we'll be unpacking the model minority myth, a pervasive stereotype that portrays certain ethnic minority groups, particularly Asian Americans, as successful, hardworking, and academically superior compared to other minorities. While this stereotype might appear flattering on the surface, it masks deeper issues of racism, discrimination, and social inequality. The model minority myth reinforces harmful narratives about race, pits minority groups against each other, and obscures the systemic barriers that all minorities face in society. The concept of the model minority emerged in the 1960s in the United States, during a time of civil rights unrest and racial tension. It was popularized through articles in national media that praised Asian Americans for their supposed ability to overcome discrimination and achieve success through hard work, family values, and a focus on education. These articles often contrasted Asian Americans with Black and Latino communities, who were depicted as struggling due to perceived cultural deficits. While Asian Americans were being lauded for their success, this narrative was rooted in a desire to invalidate the struggles of other racial groups, particularly Black Americans. It implied that if Asian Americans could succeed despite racism, then the real issue was not systemic discrimination, but rather the attitudes or behaviors of other minority groups. This narrative served to delegitimize the demands of the civil rights movement and uphold the status quo of racial inequality. The model minority myth rests on several assumptions. Academic and economic success. Asian Americans are often portrayed as excelling in academics and enjoying higher incomes than other racial groups. This stereotype suggests that hard work and dedication to education have allowed Asian Americans to succeed where other minorities have failed. Cultural values. The myth attributes the success of Asian Americans to supposedly inherent cultural traits, such as respect for authority, strong family ties, and a work ethic that emphasizes discipline and perseverance. These traits are often framed as being superior to those of other racial groups. Racial exceptionality. The model minority myth suggests that Asian Americans are somehow exceptional or different from other minority groups. This exceptionality implies that Asian Americans have managed to assimilate into white-dominated society more successfully than other minorities, reinforcing a racial hierarchy where whiteness is still the standard for success. Though the model minority myth might seem positive, it has several damaging consequences. Invisibility of struggles. The model minority narrative obscures the very real struggles that many Asian American communities face. The stereotype ignores the diversity within the Asian American population, which includes a wide range of ethnic groups with varying experiences of discrimination, poverty, and marginalization. Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander communities, for example, experience higher levels of poverty and lower educational attainment than other Asian subgroups, but their struggles are often overlooked due to the model minority myth. Pressure and mental health. For many Asian Americans, the pressure to live up to the model minority stereotype can be overwhelming. The expectation to succeed academically, professionally, and financially can lead to high levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. This pressure is compounded by the stigma surrounding mental health in many Asian cultures, where seeking help is often seen as a sign of weakness or failure. Pitting minorities against each other. One of the most insidious effects of the model minority myth is that it pits minority groups against one another. By holding up Asian Americans as a successful minority, the stereotype reinforces the idea that other racial groups, particularly Black and Latino communities, are failing due to their own shortcomings. This narrative divides minority groups, making it harder to build solidarity in the fight against systemic racism and inequality. Masking systemic racism. The model minority myth also serves to mask the realities of systemic racism. By suggesting that Asian Americans have overcome discrimination through hard work and determination, the stereotype downplays the role that structural barriers play in the lives of all minorities. It implies that racism is no longer a significant problem, and that other minority groups could succeed if they simply adopted the right cultural values or worked harder. The model minority myth is perpetuated through popular media, where Asian Americans are often depicted as high-achieving, studious, and well-behaved. Characters like Lane Kim in Gilmore Girls and Mindy Lahiri in The Mindy Project reflect these stereotypes, with their storylines often revolving around the pressures of family expectations and academic success. While these portrayals may not seem overtly negative, they reinforce a narrow, one-dimensional view of Asian American identity. On the other hand, Asian Americans are rarely depicted as rebellious, flawed, or struggling in the same way that white or even Black and Latino characters are. This lack of diversity in representation further entrenches the stereotype, suggesting that Asian Americans are inherently different from other racial groups and less affected by issues like poverty, discrimination, or mental health challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of the model minority myth. As anti-Asian sentiment and hate crimes surged in the wake of the pandemic, the stereotype of Asian Americans as successful and immune to racism was starkly contradicted. The violence and discrimination faced by Asian Americans during the pandemic highlighted the fact that no minority group is immune to systemic racism and xenophobia. The pandemic also revealed the economic and social disparities within the Asian American community. Many Asian American workers, particularly in industries like healthcare, service, and small businesses, faced significant economic challenges during the pandemic. These realities were often ignored or overshadowed by the persistent narrative of Asian American success. In recent years, there has been growing criticism of the model minority myth, both within the Asian American community and among scholars and activists. Organizations like the Asian American Pacific Islander (AAPI) Civic Engagement Fund and movements like #StopAsianHate have pushed back against the harmful effects of this stereotype, advocating for more nuanced and accurate portrayals of Asian Americans in the media and in public discourse. There has also been a push to recognize the diversity within the Asian American community and to address the specific challenges faced by different ethnic subgroups. For example, Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander communities have been advocating for better access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities, as well as more representation in policy discussions that affect their communities. The model minority myth is a harmful stereotype that reinforces racial hierarchies, pits minority groups against each other, and masks the systemic barriers that all minorities face. While it may appear to be a positive portrayal, it ultimately limits the humanity of Asian Americans, reducing them to one-dimensional figures who exist solely to uphold a flawed narrative of racial success. Now we delve into one of the most contentious and misunderstood issues in today's world: cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. As society becomes more diverse and interconnected, the boundaries between cultural exchange and cultural exploitation often blur. We'll explore the fine line between honoring another culture and disrespecting it, discussing how to differentiate between the two, why cultural appropriation is problematic, and how we can foster respectful cultural appreciation. Cultural appropriation occurs when individuals from a dominant culture adopt elements of a minority culture in ways that can be exploitative, disrespectful, or out of context. It often involves borrowing traditions, fashion, symbols, or language without acknowledging the history, significance, or struggles associated with those elements. Cultural appropriation typically takes place in a way that benefits the dominant group while marginalizing the culture being appropriated. Historically, many minority groups have faced oppression, colonization, and stereotyping, and their cultural symbols hold deep significance tied to those struggles. When a dominant culture adopts these symbols without understanding or respecting their history, it can perpetuate inequality, erase the culture's true meaning, and reduce it to a mere trend or commodity. Some examples of cultural appropriation include wearing sacred symbols or religious artifacts, e.g., Native American headdresses or bindis, as fashion statements. Adopting traditional hairstyles, like cornrows or dreadlocks, in ways that are detached from their cultural significance, especially when individuals from the original culture face discrimination for wearing them. Using language, slang, or dance moves rooted in marginalized cultures without recognizing their origins or contributing to their communities. Erosion of cultural identity. When elements of a minority culture are taken out of context and commodified, it diminishes their importance and can erase the unique identity of that culture. For example, when traditional clothing or rituals are reduced to a costume or trend, it can erase the history and meaning behind them. Power imbalance. Cultural appropriation highlights the unequal power dynamics between dominant and marginalized groups. When people from a dominant culture adopt elements of another culture, they often profit from it, gaining attention or financial success, while the minority culture is ignored, exploited, or ridiculed for practicing its own traditions. Perpetuation of stereotypes. Cultural appropriation often perpetuates stereotypes and caricatures of minority cultures. For example, Halloween costumes that depict racial stereotypes or using exaggerated accents for comedic effect trivialize and reduce complex cultures to offensive clichés. Selective acceptance. Dominant cultures often celebrate certain aspects of a minority culture, like food or music, while ignoring or discriminating against the people from that culture. This selective acceptance perpetuates a system where minority cultures are only valued for their entertainment or exotic appeal, while the people behind those cultures continue to face systemic oppression. Cultural appreciation, on the other hand, involves a genuine understanding, respect, and acknowledgement of another culture. It is about engaging with a culture in a way that honors its history, struggles, and significance without reducing it to a mere trend. Cultural appreciation is a two-way exchange, where learning and respect are at the center of the interaction. Here's how cultural appreciation differs from appropriation. Acknowledgement and credit. When engaging with another culture, it's essential to give credit where it's due. This means recognizing the culture's contributions and acknowledging the people behind the cultural elements you're appreciating. For instance, if you are inspired by a particular cuisine, art form, or music style, research its origins and give credit to the community that created it. Cultural exchange. Cultural appreciation involves a two-way exchange where both cultures benefit from mutual respect and learning. When you engage with another culture, it's not about taking but about learning, understanding, and possibly giving back. Traveling to another country, learning their customs, and contributing positively to the community are examples of respectful cultural exchange. Context matters. Cultural appreciation involves understanding the context of the cultural elements you're engaging with. For example, some clothing, hairstyles, or symbols might have deep spiritual or religious significance. It's important to understand whether it's appropriate for someone outside of the culture to use them. What might be a fashion trend to one person could be a sacred symbol to another. Self-awareness. Cultural appreciation requires self-awareness of your own position in society and the potential harm your actions might cause. If you are part of a dominant group, it's important to recognize how your use of another culture's symbols or practices could perpetuate harmful dynamics, even if unintentional. Cultural appreciation involves a willingness to listen, learn, and make thoughtful choices. Learning and sharing in cultural celebrations. Participating in cultural festivals or ceremonies in a respectful manner, such as joining in celebrations like Diwali, Chinese New Year, or indigenous powwows, can be a form of cultural appreciation. However, this should be done in a way that honors the traditions and doesn't reduce them to spectacle. Supporting minority-owned businesses. When engaging with another culture, one of the best ways to show appreciation is by supporting the people from that culture. This can mean purchasing items from minority-owned businesses or attending performances by artists from those communities. Studying a culture's history. If you are inspired by another culture's art, music, or literature, it's important to do the work of studying its history. Learn about the people behind the culture, the struggles they've faced, and how their traditions came to be. While it can sometimes be difficult to navigate the line between appreciation and appropriation, here are some tips to help ensure that your actions are rooted in respect. Educate yourself. Before adopting any element of another culture, take the time to learn about its history, significance, and the struggles of the people from that culture. Understanding the context is key to avoiding appropriation. Ask yourself, why are you doing it? If you're interested in engaging with another culture, consider your motivations. Are you doing it to genuinely appreciate and learn from the culture, or is it about following a trend? If it's the latter, reconsider your actions. Consult the community. If you're unsure whether something might be appropriative, seek advice from members of the culture in question. Their insight can help you navigate tricky situations and avoid unintentionally causing harm. Give credit and acknowledge the source. If you're adopting aspects of another culture, always give credit and acknowledge the source. This helps ensure that the culture is recognized for its contributions rather than being erased or exploited. Be mindful of context. Some cultural practices or symbols are sacred and should not be adopted by people outside of the culture. Be mindful of the context, and if in doubt, err on the side of caution. As global travel and the internet make the world more interconnected, the lines between cultural appreciation and appropriation have become increasingly blurred. Many people argue that cultural exchange is a natural part of human society, but it's essential to approach these exchanges with care and respect, especially in a world where power imbalances still exist. While we should celebrate the rich diversity of cultures around the world, we must also be mindful of how we engage with them. Cultural exchange should be about learning, mutual respect, and collaboration rather than exploitation and appropriation. By approaching cultural interactions thoughtfully, we can foster a world where appreciation is sincere and cultures are celebrated for their full complexity and beauty. Cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation are complex issues, but by educating ourselves, showing respect, and giving credit where it's due, we can navigate these waters with care. In an increasingly global society, cultural exchange is inevitable, but it must be rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and a commitment to preserving the integrity of every culture we engage with. It is crucial to challenge the model minority myth and to recognize the diversity and complexity of Asian American experiences. By doing so, we can move toward a more inclusive and equitable society, where all racial and ethnic groups are valued for their full humanity, rather than being reduced to harmful stereotypes. Now we dive into the powerful role that media plays in shaping our understanding of different cultures. From television shows and movies to social media platforms and news outlets, the media has a significant impact on how we perceive other cultures and, by extension, how we navigate cultural appreciation and appropriation. We'll explore both the positive and negative effects of media representation, how it influences societal norms, and the responsibility of creators to portray cultures accurately and respectfully. Additionally, we'll look at the rise of digital media and its role in democratizing cultural narratives, while also discussing the challenges of misinformation and stereotyping in an increasingly connected world. Media is often the lens through which many people view cultures that are different from their own. For decades, television, film, music, and even advertising have been powerful tools that shape cultural perceptions. When done thoughtfully, media can highlight the beauty, diversity, and richness of different cultures. However, media can also perpetuate harmful stereotypes, exploit cultures for entertainment, and marginalize minority voices. Stereotyping occurs when a simplified or exaggerated idea about a culture is presented repeatedly in media, leading to a distorted understanding. For example, in Hollywood films, certain ethnicities are often portrayed in limiting ways, such as Asian characters being typecast as martial artists or tech geniuses, or black characters being portrayed as criminals or athletes. These portrayals flatten the complexity of these cultures and fuel biased perceptions. Exoticism and objectification. media has a tendency to exoticize certain cultures, reducing them to a set of clichés or exotic traits that are often detached from the realities of the people in those cultures. For example, tropical locations and traditional garments may be used as mere backdrops or costumes in films and advertisements without any real understanding or appreciation of the culture. This exoticism can make the culture seem like a commodity to be consumed, rather than something to be respected and understood. Whitewashing in films and TV. Another harmful media trend is whitewashing, where white actors are cast in roles that should be played by people of color, erasing authentic representation. This has occurred numerous times in film adaptations where characters from Asian, Middle Eastern, or Black cultures have been portrayed by white actors, thus denying minority actors the opportunity to tell their own stories. Despite the pitfalls of stereotyping and whitewashing, media has the potential to shine a positive light on diverse cultures and elevate minority voices. When media producers, writers, and directors take the time to collaborate with cultural consultants, or when they allow creators from marginalized cultures to tell their own stories, the results can be incredibly powerful. Accurate and nuanced portrayals. Shows like Master of None and Insecure are examples of television programs that provide nuanced and authentic representations of minority cultures. These shows explore the complexities of cultural identity, love, family, and career from the perspective of people of color without resorting to stereotypes. These representations help break down cultural barriers and allow viewers to see people from different backgrounds as multidimensional. Celebration of cultural traditions. Films such as Black Panther and Coco serve as great examples of media that celebrate cultural traditions in a way that is respectful and engaging. Black Panther drew heavily from Black traditions and aesthetics, showcasing the beauty of Black culture without falling into common stereotypes. Similarly, Coco embraced the rich traditions of Mexico's Dia de los Muertos, offering audiences a deeper appreciation of the culture's values surrounding family and ancestry. Media as a tool for social change. Media can also be used to bring attention to social issues and injustices affecting marginalized communities. Documentaries like 13th by Ava DuVernay and The Social Dilemma highlight systemic problems while educating viewers on important cultural, social, and political dynamics. By shining a spotlight on issues such as racial inequality and the power dynamics of digital platforms, media can raise awareness and inspire change. Social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter have opened up new avenues for cultural expression and exchange. Unlike traditional media, where a few corporations control the narrative, social media gives individuals the power to share their stories, perspectives, and cultural practices on a global scale. This democratization of media has allowed for a greater diversity of voices and has enabled underrepresented communities to take control of their own narratives. Cultural empowerment through social media. Social media allows people to showcase their culture on their own terms. Indigenous creators on platforms like TikTok, for example, have used the platform to share their cultural traditions, music, and language with the world, gaining millions of followers in the process. This direct-to-audience connection bypasses traditional media gatekeepers and allows for more authentic representation. Cross-cultural learning and exchange. Social media can also be a tool for positive cultural exchange. Platforms like YouTube have countless channels dedicated to teaching viewers about different cultures through cooking, travel, language learning, and more. This helps foster a greater understanding and appreciation of cultural diversity in a way that is engaging and accessible to a global audience. Challenges of misinformation and cultural misrepresentation. However, social media is not without its challenges. With the rise of influencer culture, there is often a fine line between cultural appreciation and appropriation, particularly when cultural elements are used without proper context or respect. Additionally, misinformation and cultural misrepresentation can spread quickly on social media, perpetuating harmful stereotypes or inaccurate portrayals. Given the influence that media has on shaping cultural perceptions, there is a responsibility that comes with creating content. Media creators, whether they are Hollywood filmmakers, YouTubers, or social media influencers, should strive for accuracy, respect, and inclusivity when representing cultures. Inclusion of diverse voices. One of the most important steps media creators can take is to include people from the cultures being represented in the creation process. Whether that means hiring writers, directors, or actors from the community or consulting with cultural experts, involving authentic voices ensures that the portrayal is accurate and respectful. Research and cultural consultation. Creators should take the time to research and understand the cultural elements they wish to incorporate into their work. Consulting with members of the community or experts in the field can help avoid unintentional missteps and ensure that cultural symbols and traditions are used appropriately. Tackling stereotypes. Media creators have the power to challenge harmful stereotypes by portraying diverse cultures in complex and humanizing ways. Rather than relying on overused tropes or one-dimensional characters, creators can develop stories that reflect the rich and varied experiences of different cultural groups. As media continues to evolve in the digital age, there is an increasing need for thoughtful representation of cultural diversity. By elevating minority voices, challenging stereotypes, and fostering authentic cultural exchange, media creators can contribute to a more inclusive and respectful global society. At the same time, audiences must remain critical of the media they consume, recognizing both the positive and negative ways it shapes their perceptions of culture. The future of cultural representation in media holds great potential, and it is up to both creators and consumers to ensure that it is used as a tool for education, empathy, and empowerment rather than exploitation and marginalization. Now we explore the complex intersection of fashion, culture, and identity, and how fashion can act as both a means of cultural appreciation and appropriation. Throughout history, fashion has been influenced by different cultures, often borrowing styles, fabrics, and motifs from various traditions around the world. However, this borrowing is not always done in a respectful or thoughtful manner, leading to instances where cultural symbols are appropriated without proper understanding or acknowledgement of their significance. We will discuss how fashion can be a powerful tool for cultural expression and pride, but also how it can become problematic when used without context or respect for the cultures being represented. By analyzing both historical and contemporary examples, we aim to better understand the line between appreciation and appropriation in the fashion world. Fashion has always been a reflection of culture, identity, and social values. From traditional garments to modern streetwear, what we wear can tell a story about who we are and where we come from. In many cultures, clothing is deeply tied to history, religion, and social customs, making it an important marker of identity. Traditional attire and its significance. Many cultures have distinct traditional garments that hold deep cultural and spiritual meaning. For example, the Japanese kimono, the Indian sari, and the Scottish kilt are more than just clothing, they represent centuries of tradition and carry significant cultural symbolism. These garments are often worn during important ceremonies, festivals, and rites of passage, highlighting their deep connection to cultural heritage. Cultural pride through fashion. For many people, wearing traditional clothing or incorporating cultural elements into their everyday fashion is a way to express pride in their heritage. Fashion can be a celebration of one's roots, allowing individuals to honor their ancestry while also making a statement about their identity. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of cultural pride through fashion, with many designers and brands drawing inspiration from their own cultures to create modern interpretations of traditional attire. The globalization of fashion. As fashion becomes increasingly globalized, styles and trends from different parts of the world are more accessible than ever. This has led to a blending of cultures in the fashion world, where elements from various traditions are combined to create new, hybrid styles. While this can lead to innovation and cross-cultural exchange, it also raises questions about the ethics of borrowing from other cultures. Cultural appropriation in fashion occurs when elements of a culture are used by people outside of that culture in a way that is disrespectful, exploitative, or detached from their original meaning. This often happens when cultural symbols, garments, or styles are taken out of context, commodified, or used purely for aesthetic purposes without any understanding or acknowledgement of their cultural significance. The commercialization of cultural symbols. One of the most common forms of appropriation in fashion is the commercialization of cultural symbols. This occurs when sacred or significant cultural items are mass-produced and sold for profit without the consent or involvement of the people from that culture. For example, Native American headdresses, which are deeply sacred and reserved for specific ceremonies, have been used as fashion accessories at music festivals and in advertising campaigns, stripping them of their cultural meaning. Borrowing without credit. Another issue with cultural appropriation in fashion is the tendency to borrow from marginalized cultures without giving proper credit or recognition. Historically, many fashion designers and brands have taken inspiration from cultures like Africa, Asia, and indigenous communities without acknowledging the source of their inspiration or including members of those communities in the creative process. This can lead to the erasure of the cultural contributions of these communities, while the designer profits from their work. Exoticism and objectification. Cultural appropriation often involves exoticism, where elements of a culture are portrayed as exotic or other, and used for their novelty value. This objectification reduces the culture to a stereotype, rather than recognizing its complexity and humanity. For example, the use of indigenous patterns or black prints in high fashion can sometimes feel like a superficial nod to diversity, rather than a genuine celebration of the culture's richness. Cultural appropriation in fashion has been a recurring issue, with numerous high-profile cases sparking debate and controversy. Victoria's Secret and the Native American headdress. In 2012, Victoria's Secret came under fire for sending a model down the runway wearing a Native American-style headdress. The headdress, which holds significant spiritual and cultural meaning, was used as a costume, causing outrage within Native American communities. The brand was accused of trivializing and commodifying indigenous culture for the sake of fashion, leading to public apologies. Marc Jacobs and dreadlocks. In 2016, designer Marc Jacobs faced backlash for sending models down the runway wearing dreadlocks, a hairstyle traditionally associated with black culture. The controversy was amplified by the fact that most of the models wearing the dreadlocks were white, raising questions about why black models weren't chosen to represent the hairstyle. Critics argued that Jacobs was appropriating a hairstyle with deep cultural and political significance without acknowledging its origins. Dolce & Gabbana and Chinese culture. In 2018, Dolce & Gabbana faced criticism for a marketing campaign that featured a Chinese model struggling to eat Italian food with chopsticks. The ad was widely seen as culturally insensitive and reinforced stereotypes about Chinese people. The campaign sparked a boycott of the brand in China and highlighted the dangers of using cultural symbols without understanding or respecting their meaning. While cultural appropriation is a serious issue, it's important to distinguish it from cultural appreciation. Cultural appreciation involves a genuine interest in learning about and honoring the traditions and values of a culture. When done respectfully and thoughtfully, cultural appreciation in fashion can promote understanding, foster cross-cultural exchange, and celebrate the beauty of diverse traditions. Collaborating with cultural communities. One of the best ways to ensure cultural appreciation in fashion is to collaborate with members of the culture being represented. Designers can work with artisans, cultural experts, and community leaders to ensure that their work is respectful and accurate. This not only leads to better representation but also helps support the communities whose traditions are being showcased. Learning about cultural significance. Fashion designers and consumers alike should take the time to learn about the cultural significance of the items they wear or create. Understanding the history, meaning, and context of cultural symbols ensures that they are used in a way that honors their origins, rather than exploiting them for aesthetic purposes. Supporting ethical and sustainable fashion. Many indigenous and minority communities have their own fashion industries, where artisans create traditional garments and textiles. By supporting these ethical and sustainable fashion initiatives, consumers can help preserve cultural traditions while also promoting economic development within these communities. As the fashion industry becomes more aware of the importance of cultural respect, there is hope for a future where fashion can be a tool for cultural appreciation rather than appropriation. Many designers and brands are taking steps to ensure that their work is inclusive, respectful, and collaborative. Consumers also play a role by being mindful of the cultural significance of the clothing they wear and supporting brands that prioritize ethical and respectful practices. By fostering a deeper understanding of the cultures that inspire fashion, we can create a more inclusive industry that celebrates diversity in a way that honors and uplifts the communities at the heart of these traditions. Fashion is a powerful tool for self-expression and cultural identity, but it also comes with a responsibility to respect the cultures that inspire it. While cultural appropriation remains a problem in the fashion world, there is an opportunity for change as designers and consumers become more aware of the impact of their choices. By fostering cultural appreciation, supporting ethical fashion practices, and promoting genuine cross-cultural exchange, the fashion industry can move toward a future that celebrates diversity with respect and dignity. And finally, I bet you thought I wasn't going to include them, negative stereotypes of white people. Negative stereotypes of white people in media often portray them as entitled, self-centered, and ignorant of their privilege. These depictions reduce white characters to shallow archetypes, ignoring the complexity and diversity within their experiences. One prevalent stereotype is that of the clueless, or oblivious, white person, who is depicted as being out of touch with the struggles and realities faced by marginalized communities. This character often embodies a lack of awareness about race and social justice issues, sometimes even unintentionally causing harm through their ignorance. Such portrayals can reinforce the idea that white people, as a group, are detached from social realities or are unwilling to engage meaningfully with issues of equity and inclusion. Another prominent stereotype is the cultural appropriator, where white people are shown exploiting cultural symbols, practices, or aesthetics without understanding or respecting their deeper significance. This portrayal often casts them as superficial or exploitative, using other cultures as a form of entertainment or trend without acknowledging the historical and social contexts behind those elements. This not only fuels resentment but also flattens the narrative, framing white people as consistently acting in bad faith, when the reality is far more nuanced. One of the most pervasive stereotypes is the white savior trope. In many films and stories, white characters are depicted as the only ones capable of solving problems or uplifting marginalized communities. These narratives center the white experience and make their interventions seem essential for progress, reinforcing a paternalistic dynamic that diminishes the agency, resilience, and capability of non-white characters. While intended to showcase altruism or heroism, this portrayal implies that people of color cannot succeed without the help of a benevolent white figure, erasing their own efforts and contributions in the process. These negative stereotypes are damaging because they paint white people with a broad, reductionist brush, failing to recognize the diversity of perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences within any racial or ethnic group. By focusing narrowly on privilege, ignorance, or paternalism, these portrayals ignore the possibility of white people who are empathetic, informed, and committed to justice in ways that respect the autonomy of others. Just as with stereotypes about any group, such narrow depictions ultimately serve to simplify and divide, rather than to encourage deeper understanding and more meaningful portrayals of individuals in their full humanity. 2 wrongs don't make a right, but 3 rights make a left. I have a hatred for all negative stereotypes. Instilled within me by my dad. He used to watch everything and point out the stereotype to me. He would say that's sickening. We, as in black me, particularly born in the 1930s, fought to get that shit off of the screen, and now that idiot is doing it again. I didn't fully understand back when I was a child, but as I have grown up and now have had 50 birthdays myself, I get what he was saying. This is my magnum opus to you, Dad. Looking down on me, I hope it makes you proud. This has been the Big Book of Bad Stereotypes. You are watching and listening to Quavertv. Hi, I'm Quaver. If you like this, then like this, comment and subscribe. To support my work, you can send digital debits to my account $Quaver911 on Cash App. You can also support the channel by purchasing from the links in my bio. Deuce means 2 and that spells peace, and I am out. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight.